Hello, and welcome to the paradoxical role of data, weapon, and defense. Your presenters today are Dr. Sharon L. Burton, Dr. Laura Jones, and Michelle Espinoza. We will begin with Dr. Burton. Michelle Espinoza will take you through the presentation, and Dr. Jones will wrap it up. Our agenda for today: data paradox, cybercrime statistics, fraud as a complex system, case study walkthrough, and data triangulation and enrichment. Now I'll take you through the goal of this presentation. The main goal of this presentation focuses on a multifaceted nature of data, particularly in the context of cybercrime and fraud detection. The key things you'll go through today: the paradoxical role of data, cybercrime statistics, case study, and how to utilize data in building fraud detection models. Our participant learning outcomes are to understand the complex and paradoxical data of nature, to comprehend the landscape of cybercrime and online fraud through the lens of complexity science, and how to enrich data and apply it to fraud detection and investigation. At this point, Michelle Espinoza, doctoral student, will take over and lead you to the presentation. Michelle?
Thank you very much, Dr. Burton. So the data paradox, or the paradoxical nature of data. Think of this as the plot line in countless action movies. Your data is like a treasure box. You have no idea what it does, what's in the box, but you know something catastrophic will happen if the bad guys get to it first. So you spend the entire movie getting shot at, chased, villains are popping out of closets trying to take it from you. And if you're lucky, you figure out what it is, how to use it, and you become a superhero like Blue Beetle. And this highlights the paradoxical nature of data. So companies invest a tremendous amount in protecting their systems from data breaches. Data theft poses substantial risk to companies, particularly small and medium enterprises, for whom a single breach can jeopardize their very survival. Short-term incident costs include damage to assets, intellectual property, the loss of business continuity, and the cost involved with investigating the breach. Long-term costs include reputational damage, market losses, loss of existing and potential customers, and in some cases, steep fines related to the breach. But ironically, this resource that businesses invest so much in protecting is one that organizations really struggle to extract value from. Only 18% of companies surveyed by Deloitte have been able to leverage the hidden potential of their unstructured data. Companies average 18 to 36 months of regularly working with data to develop a steady stream of rich insights that can be translated into practice. In a discussion I had with a gentleman who's a fraud analyst in the insurance industry, he described a situation where the fraudsters unknowingly gained access to their internal systems and started rerouting shipments. They didn't realize what was going on for maybe a couple of weeks. They couldn't figure out how the fraudsters were doing it. So once they caught on, they took that data, they worked with the shipping company, and they planted some fake data as a honeypot. Were able to follow the shipments and eventually apprehend the thieves. So in the context of cybercrime or fraud detection, it's like that story of the three little bears. We have too much data, too little data, and data voids. If you look at the sky with your smartphone camera, you'll be able to see things on screen that you can't see with the naked eye. The same concept applies to any infrared night vision camera. 95% of the universe is comprised of dark matter and dark energy. The point is that just because you can't see it doesn't mean there isn't something there. In some cases, you may just need to look at it through a different lens, and that's what we're driving to, with the need to look at fraud and cybercrime through the lens of complexity science. The 2012 FBI Regional Computer Forensic Laboratory annual report noted that the volume of data requiring analysis for each case grew 500% between 2006 and 2013. Cross-linking multiple data sources and devices, in addition to sifting through the sheer volume of data associated with a single forensic investigation, continues to compound the problem more than a decade since that report. Think of this as a DDoS attack against a network, except this is against our businesses and our government's ability to process this much information. If you look at the last congressional update on COVID benefits fraud, there are still 163,000 open investigations. They continue to get 100 to 300 new reports per week. Even with the current fraud task force and collaborating with all 50 US attorneys' offices at the current pace, it's going to take through July 2050 to get through the backlog of investigations in an attempt to recover the more than 200 billion that is estimated to have gone out the door in fraudulent payments. To date, I believe they've recovered 1.7 billion. But this is not a new problem, the too much data problem. Since prehistoric times, we've been dealing with too much data. This is where we got the abacus, pi, scientific notation. And if you look at the billions of stars in the sky, we were able to narrow it down to a handful of constellations that help us track time and navigate the world. Ironically, another challenge is that we have too little data. On the investigation side, we may have too much circumstantial evidence because we're missing key pieces of information that link the data together. An argument we often hear, which I challenge is incorrect, is that there aren't enough publicly available data sets to create better fraud detection algorithms. Fraudsters adapt their methods faster than we adapt our detection methods. The growth rate of fraud and cybercrime outpaces our ability to investigate it. Adding additional data points like OSINT, open source intelligence, enables us to discover missing connections or patterns that are not visible in the existing data set. So we've all heard the stats, but just in case you've been living under a rock for the last few years, cybercrime is predicted to cost the world $10.5 trillion by 2025, which is larger than all but two nations' economies. Again, fraudsters evolved their methods to avoid detection nearly as quickly or faster than companies develop detection methods. And many detection methods still rely on analyzing individual transactions, which ignores the collusive nature that is more characteristic of today's organized fraud rings. Cyber-enabled fraud and cybercrime have been growing exponentially for several years. It takes so many forms, and you have fake store reviews, fake product reviews, synthetic identity fraud, identity theft, money laundering, money muling. Even if companies aren't being targeted directly, there's a good chance that their apps or services are being used to facilitate and coordinate the activity between fraudsters. You can go online right now and enlist 100 random people around the world to walk into a bank and open a checking account to receive fraudulent payments. And the truth is that even if 99 of the fraudulent transactions were caught before they happened, good luck figuring out where the initial order came from. And you can almost guarantee that unless you piece together the entire case, there's not a single law enforcement agency in the world that will be willing to investigate or prosecute it. What we have here is a problem that's growing out of control. It's cross-jurisdictional, low risk, and highly profitable. If it was just a matter of building better detection methods, we would not have the problem that we're seeing today. In a 1977 lecture by Daniela Meadows on the philosophy of system dynamics, she said that anytime there's a problem growing exponentially, we need to identify the positive feedback loop in the system. This is where complexity science enters the picture. We need to step back and look at the system as a whole. So what exactly is complexity science? It's the study of the relationships between systems. Linear systems are additive. The output is always the sum of the input. 1 + 1 = 2. Complex systems are highly interdependent, decentralized, self-organizing, and sensitive to feedback loops. What are feedback loops? Think of this in terms of a thermostat. You turn the thermostat to a certain temperature, the heater or the air conditioner kick on until the room reaches the desired temperature, then it shuts off. Once the temperature exceeds or falls below the desired temperature threshold, the thermostat kicks back on, and this loop continues. In the case of cybercrime, as digitization increases, online fraud increases. As online fraud increases, financial losses to business increase. As financial losses increase, the budget to investigate fraud decreases. Both of these contribute to decreasing investigation capacity. And as the investigation capacity decreases, the likelihood of catching fraudsters decreases even more. Emergence occurs when a complex system has properties or behaviors that the individual parts do not have on their own. In the context of fraud detection, individual actions or components may not constitute a crime. It's not until their actions are placed together with the larger network that a fraud ring emerges. Machine learning cannot detect patterns that have not yet emerged. So here we have a less abstract example of how cybercrime and online fraud take shape in a complex system. Select any blue box or yellow line in this picture. Is the element benign or malignant? If you remove it, how easy is it for new connections to form so that network continues uninterrupted? Looking at just one component of the system doesn't tell you very much. It's when these components start interacting that the crime emerges. These crimes are unconstrained by geographic or dimensional boundaries. Our laws and policies are 10 to 20 years behind where they need to be in order to effectively combat this problem. Just as we can't fight a forest fire by pouring a bucket of water at our feet, combating cybercrime and fraud requires that we examine the system as a whole. To recap, fraud and cybercrime is adaptive. Fraudsters adapt their methods to our detection efforts. It's collusive more often than not, and this collusion overrides the traditional spectrum of fraud prevention measures, such as separation of duties and oversight. Fraud displays emergent patterns. Fraud can be visualized as networks. These are properties of complex systems, not of linear systems. Now, machine learning still has its place in the fraud detection ecosystem, but it's not enough. If these models were effective on their own, then cybercrime would not be growing exponentially year over year. Fraud screens are adaptive, machine learning models are not. Classical machine learning assume that each artifact or transaction is independent of the rest. This is a faulty assumption for fraud investigation. Using the bird flock as an example, let us assume that we remove or arrest a dozen birds from the flock. Which dozen dismantle the flock? Up until this point, we've been using fraud detection and investigation somewhat interchangeably, but they really are two distinct processes. The more laborious of the two is the investigation component, which requires human revision of the activity that was detected. This is the piece of the process that we need to speed up. You'll want to keep the automated detection methods in place, but don't let your teams get too hung up on perfecting detection models because it's an ongoing effort and the models will be outdated as quickly as their utility is realized. Wherever possible, invest more effort into speeding up the investigation process and improving the models on the investigation side of the equation. We recommend using graph databases for this. Since they're schema-less, you can incorporate new data points quickly without disrupting your main database infrastructure. Okay, so now we're going to take these principles and apply them in a case study and hopefully provide you with some ideas on how to stage your own data. This case centers on refund fraud. It's a really popular scam nowadays. There are countless vendors advertising these services online. They cost vendors millions per year. Sadly, these schemes often involve compromised employees, counterfeit products, compromised credentials, and vendors have hundreds of thousands of customers around the world. The preconditions that we'll cover here on the crime script include data points that these companies would already have in their possession. Graph models get really complex really quickly, but as your teams learn the topologies to look for that are specific to your domain, querying the information becomes much easier. Graph networks are ideal for modeling relationships between variables. We refer to the objects or entities as nodes and the relationships as edges. Nodes and edges can both have properties. Properties can be added to nodes and edges. Properties can also be modeled as nodes. Think about the star constellation. In most cases, you're going to want to reference the entire constellation, so it makes sense to model the constellation as one node. In other circumstances, you may need to reference two specific stars within the constellation, and therefore you might model each star as an individual node and add an edge between them called part of constellation. Building these models takes experimenting and creativity. We recommend that you try sketching your model before importing the data, but for the impatient, it's really easy to collapse and expand properties and entities once you get the hang of it, particularly if you're well versed at doing database joins and groupings in your head. So Bob and Rob are nodes. Are friends or have been friends for is the edge between them. 5 years is the edge property. Bob likes comedies. Comedies can be a property of Bob's nodes, or comedies can be its own node of a different type. You're going to want to add unique constraints for each node type so that every connection to Bob leads to that single node. Hopefully we didn't lose you with that explanation. Using the facts from the case, I'm going to walk through what I perceive as the wasted data connection opportunities and the variables and logic I would use to improve the monitoring, reporting, and investigation efforts. We know that we have the customer, the recipient, the refund requester, and the employee. They may be one person or 4 people. Either way, we'll have a unique user ID for each person. And since collusion overrides a traditional spectrum of fraud prevention measures such as separation of duties and oversight, shared relationships that cross these permission boundaries will be of particular interest. If I were modeling this, I would start with the 2 node types, employee and user customer. Employee data is likely stored in a separate database, particularly if the service platform is on a different domain or uses a separate application. Your network systems are like a door. Each time a user accesses your platform, the IP address is stored. Think of every possible touchpoint interaction that these users interact with your internal and external systems. Each IP address should be a unique node. The first 3 segments of an IP address tell you who the internet service provider is. You can also glean the user's geolocation. Some data points like timestamps are better left in tabular format. You'll want to look for locations where an employee, for example, shouldn't be logging into requesting a refund from the same device where they're interacting with your customer service agent. Device fingerprinting. You can get the device manufacturer, the regional settings from that device. Do those line up with the geolocation of the IP address that you're interacting with? The shipping address. How often have you shipped to this specific address? Does the address belong to that customer? Does it belong to the refund requester? Are there any addresses on file belonging to internal users matching that location? Same with IP address, device, fingerprint. Is the person who's requesting a refund somebody who's logged into your internal systems before? In this particular case that we're looking at, there were no verification of the serial numbers or model identifiers of the items when they were returned, or even when they were shipped out. So logging that type of information can help you to identify maybe counterfeit products that are being returned. Photos of the delivered items when deliveries are handed to the recipient were not required in some of these cases. So maybe implementing a policy, and I'm actually seeing this in more delivery services now, where they're required to take that photo regardless of whether they're handing it to you or not. Match the resolution of the photo with the device that is supposedly assigned to the user taking the photo, to make sure you're not getting falsified photographs. In this case, no secondary audit or tracking was in place to check, okay, who checked these items in? Is there an unusual correlation between the number of items that go missing and the number of items that are being checked in? So this would be the sample model. These are the connections that you'll see. Don't be intimidated. If you're new to modeling your data as a graph, it can be look really confusing at first, but I promise that it gets much easier. You'll start to identify which of these variables you want to leave as in tabular format for your own reporting, maybe alerts, automated alerting, investigation. Once you query certain topologies, you can pull everybody from the network who matches that specific pattern, and it becomes really simple to filter down through your data. So just to reiterate, companies already have these data points, but to construct these models, you often stop short of analyzing the relationships that could catch this fraud sooner. Because graph databases are schemaless, adding or developing new data points.
Same.
Sharon, we'll wait for Michelle to reconnect, but if you're okay to take over, that would be fantastic.
So the last screen here is data triangulation, and it's speaking to how companies
I think we lost the presentation.
yes.
Don't worry. Michelle's coming back on.
Okay. They call it technology.
It's all good. We're doing very well for time.
Oh, did I lose part here?
Yeah,
We had a disconnection for a moment. If it's okay, Michelle, please could you share your presentation again, please?
Yes, just give me one moment.
Yeah, we lost you right on that that last data triangulation screen. I think it might have been the one before that one.
Right before?
Yeah.
All right,
right.
so I'll go ahead and repeat this piece again. So just to reiterate, companies already have these data points to construct these models, but they often stop short of analyzing the relationships that could catch this type of fraud sooner. Because graph databases are schemaless, adding or developing new features is really easy. Graph neural networks are computationally expensive, but community detection is not. Community detection are the algorithms that you would use to identify this type of activity within these graphs once you have them set up. And again, the picture of this graph is a representation of the case study walkthrough. As you're linking your data, do relationships exist where they shouldn't? Are relationships missing where they shouldn't be? How rare is the device manufacturer in the region of that user? You can use open source information to pull that data in. Huawei in the US, Oppo in the US versus maybe Apple in India. Do the region settings of the device accessing your site match the user's stated location in the IP address of their location? Has the device appeared with any other transactions? Is the address linked to any other customers? How often have you shipped to that address? What's the return rate going to that address? Is an employee processing an inordinate volume of transactions for certain product categories? Do you have your high-risk product categories labeled to flag unusual activity emanating from a specific region, warehouse, employee, cluster of accounts? Does information from public records match the information that was provided? Your fraud monitoring may be split between real-time decisions and ongoing efforts. Your investigation teams, you definitely want to keep that coordination between them, but if you have separate systems, be sure that your data is talking to each other so that you can quickly link the activity that's going on between internal users, external users, new users. And on that note, I'm going to pass it off to Dr. Jones.
All right, very good. Thank you, Michelle, for such a comprehensive presentation. And thank you, Dr. Burton, for your opening. We certainly want to thank everyone for attending this presentation, The Paradoxical Role of Data, Weapon, and Defense. The learning outcome objectives were to assist you in understanding the complex and paradoxical nature of data, comprehending the landscape of cybercrime and online fraud through the lens of a complexity science, and how to enrich data and apply it in fraud detection and investigation. Our contact information is shown on this slide, and we're now happy to take any questions that you may have.
Michelle, if there are any questions, can you go back and talk about those data points? I think that it's very interesting for people to understand who may work in any industries that could be connected to fraud, and how the materials are called out that may have high interest for fraudsters, and how companies can flag these particular materials that are potentially high fraud. So if we start seeing a lot of returns on those, it gives out an alert. Can you give a little bit more on that?
Yes, so if you have, let's say a high volume, let's say MacBooks, those tend to be a really popular category, falsified returns. If you have the serial number is always on the box, so maybe implementing an automated way to track that serial number when it goes out the door, when it returns, look at where it's being returned from. If you're using UPS, FedEx, I forget some of the other shipping companies, your account should automatically enable that. You should have an API that allows you to import the tracking number from those boxes that went out. You can import the geolocation, the address, and quickly just match it up with your internal system to make sure that the data aligns. You can pull in public records, the owner information of the property where something is being shipped. How closely does that match with the name of the recipient? We have a lot of models in place nowadays that can just quickly parse through thousands of emails and score how close they are. Similarity in spelling, maybe Robert and Bob, you're going to put those groupings together. Use topic modeling for refund requests. Does the wording come in the same? When they submit on Amazon, for example, where you're given the option to insert a comment with the return reason, how similar is the wording? Are you seeing a pattern from a certain cluster of accounts where they're using identical wording in those return reasons? Delivery directions. So maybe sometimes we'll say, use this code, or leave at the door. Don't leave at the door, come around back. Look for those types of patterns and have some automated alerting in place to link, okay, this activity, this wording, these phrases are coming from this cluster of accounts. We're seeing device fingerprints. People legitimately send each other, I send family members items all the time online that I purchase. So look at the time of year, family holidays where families do tend to be together, it's not going to be unusual to see multiple device fingerprints coming in from those locations. Maybe everybody's Black Friday shopping online together. So you're going to also want to take into account the temporal conditions, maybe create some variables for that. Look at the metrics between certain employees, certain warehouses, certain regions, have those stacked up against the other individuals within those regions, within those warehouses. Not necessarily related to, so if you have a hotline for reporting fraud, and the same goes for tips for the tragedies that we see online, all too often we'll see a headline that, oh, the FBI was warned that this was going to happen. And so, it's easy for us to sit at home in our smartphone jury bench and, lash out that the FBI didn't do something sooner. But the reality is, sifting through thousands, sometimes hundreds of thousands of tips and identifying which of those is credible, it takes time. So use topic modeling. The large language models that the development that's gone into large language models is so far advanced at this point that it's easy to combine topic modeling with the language coming in, set up flags, the specificity of details, using entity identification, are specific names given, specific locations, create scoring for clusters of information that come in where it might be more credible because of the specific detail that's provided in the complaint or in a tip. And again, I know this is a lot to digest for the audience. If you have any additional questions or would like insight, maybe in how to handle your specific case situation, we're happy to provide that additional context or insight. But again, these are just some ideas for ways that retailers can address this issue, how you can link this information within your own organization, how to make better use of the data, pull in as much open source information as possible, make use of those of public records, do reverse lookups in, it's easy to say that you can never have enough data or you have too much data. You're going to have to learn through trial and error what reporting is relevant to your domain, and then be on the lookout for new modi operandi. And as you start shutting one fraud ring down, another emerges. It's going to be an ongoing effort. And folks are clever. Every almost like it almost seems like every barrier that we put in place gives rise to an entrepreneurial opportunity on the fraudster side. We require account verification, ID verification. Well, you go online and you have countless services around the world, people offering to verify accounts for pennies on the dollar. So I'm trying to think of another example. You have account verification. They sell pre-bundled accounts, credentials, Philo logs, and the list of clever tactics that they put in place to work around our workarounds are endless. And again, until we get our policies to a place where this type of or these types of crimes can be prosecuted quickly, and we get inter-jurisdictional cooperation, transferring evidence in the US, for example, in order for the evidence to be admissible in court, the government where the evidence is collected needs to certify that evidence, and that has to go through the office of the that's the OIA, and those requests can take months or years to process. So if we don't have an extradition agreement, there's little incentive to spend the limited resources that a department may have, chasing after something that may never actually result in an arrest, or may ultimately end up being transferred to another agency. And at the end of the day, your taxpayers are like, hey, where did our money go? And if you have to have something to show for it. So that's another contributor to the low prosecution rates in these types of cases.
I would like to bring out another point. Noted is the device fingerprint. As a criminologist, I learned fingerprinting, arches, loops, swirls, and accidentals. That is the physical fingerprint. But in terms of the device fingerprint, can you speak to whether it is called out specifically in types such as the physical fingerprint, and how is that connected back to the fraud?
So the device fingerprint, it depends on the API that you have in place. LexisNexis is the gold standard for a lot of companies. And the device fingerprint that they capture contains these attributes. One of the challenges that we run into with device fingerprinting now is privacy and anonymity, two sides of the same coin. So you have Apple and Google both now implementing anti-fingerprinting. So where we could have captured the device fingerprint includes the user agent, the device manufacturer, the regional settings, the browser version, the operating system version. These are all details that are captured, and the extensions that you have installed, the apps that you have installed. In some cases, it divulges the information running in the background. The time, and there's so many attributes that it depends on the service, but those are the primary attributes that are captured in a device fingerprint, and they are, I believe, the last test is like 99% specific to any device. Unfortunately, if you have multiple monitors, for example, accessing a site from one screen is going to give me a different device fingerprint than if I access it from my same device on a different screen. So one user may have thousands of device fingerprints on file as they continue updating their operating system, as they're using different browsers, different browser versions, and those stack up over time. But you can extract portions of those fingerprints and link those together by similarity. Maybe you want to look for operating system version. We know how difficult it is to move backwards in an iOS version after an update. So if somebody's on iOS 17.2 and suddenly they jump back to 17.1, maybe you want to create a variable that flags that as an alert. And that would speed up the investigation portion. So you have that flag already in place. When you look up these users, you look for those certain flags or indicators like, oh, hey, this is suspicious. Or hey, this person has been using Chrome for 88% of their logins, and suddenly now they're using Firefox. Those unusual patterns are things that you're going to want to flag in the investigation process.
Okay.
The anti-fingerprinting with the privacy protection methods are making this less useful of a tool, so we're going to have to continue to evolve identifiers, how we identify the devices and users that are accessing our systems.
Okay, thank you.
Great. Michelle, you mentioned that fraudsters are definitely outpacing us. in terms of their antics. So based on the research that you conducted, to what extent did you find perhaps that the fraudsters are primarily using linear or complex models to outpace us?
So as far as outpacing, that's been an ongoing problem even since before the internet age. That is just the nature of the beast, unfortunately. But the collusion piece really came into light, I'd say, with the social media in the availability of these massive chat apps, Discord, Telegram, WhatsApp, Facebook groups, where you can basically lock people out, let only certain people in, and have your activity continue unhindered, uncensored. You also have the fine line between freedom of speech and, you know, the ability to just frequently post online, hey, here's my illegal service, anybody who wants to buy it, sign up. And you have hundreds of thousands of people in these channels openly speaking about illicit activity. The detection model, they know who the different providers are, the different detection methods. That's another piece, I forgot to mention that. So in implementing your detection methods within your organization, you're going to want to keep what you're using to detect users or detect this type of activity limited to only people who need to know, because as soon as you disclose it, everybody knows the workaround. That's I'm not sure it totally addressed the question, but I think it's just an important piece to mention here.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you. It sounded a bit more trending towards the linear models.
Yeah, so as far as linear models, that is, is this credit card stolen? Yay, nay.
Yeah.
That's perfect for machine learning, the classical machine learning, because it's gauging that transaction and it's classifying the risk to that transaction. But your risk from a $5 or $10 transaction is minimal compared to identifying 5,000 people who are working together. And you're gonna miss the forest for the trees, so to speak.
Okay, thank you. Were there any questions that came in, perhaps online or in the room?
We've had no questions come in at the moment, I'm afraid.
Okay, all right. So I'll turn it over to you, Michelle, to close us out.
All right, well, again, we want to thank you for joining us today. Our contact information here on this slide. And I'm going to stop sharing my screen.
Wonderful. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.